Hello, internet friends, and welcome to Keep the Game Moving. This is going to be a little bit of a different episode, and I'm excited about this because my guest, Tiana Hanson, is a new GM, a relatively new GM at this point. I think you're starting to stop being the new kid. I have the joy of playing with Tiana on Quests and Chaos all the time. She's been playing in my games, and I got to see her first time being a GM. Terrifyingly enough, correct me if I'm wrong, your first time GMing was on camera.
Yeah. The very first time that I ever ran a game was the Stranger Things 2-shot that we did.
That is impressive and not something I would do.
It was definitely a trial by fire, but I really enjoyed it.
Well, Tiana, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. And, so many of the discussions that I've had have been with people who, GMing's kind of like driving. Like, we don't really remember how we learned. It's just something we've always known. And, we have thoughts on how to, do it better or to, sort of things we can change, but we don't have that experience of sort of, I'm going to just do this. And so, just walk us through sort of your intro to GMing.
So it was kind of a surprise, to be perfectly honest. I had mentioned in passing to Thomas Cook of Quests and Chaos that I was interested at some point in GMing. And he surprised me at one point with, hey, we just got the Stranger Things module that just came out in connection with the television show. And would you like to run it? Everything is here in the box. Do you want to do it? So prior to that, I remember being on record for the very first natural one shot saying, I'm surrounded by GMs. I'm never going to be a GM. Your change decisions live on in the internet, apparently.
It's so true. It's so true. And I mean, for people who want to start GMing, don't do it on stream, but taking that out of the box first module and running it is a great way to get reps, because that's how you get better, is just keep doing it. You keep doing it, and you find a table that is kind and that is giving and understanding of the fact that, you're trying something new.
Yeah.
And then you do it again and you just keep doing it. That's, that is like 95% of the battle is, and you will get better as you go. And so what was it like making that transition from, because you've played for a while, mainly D&D.
Yes.
Making that transition to GM. I mean, you probably had the rules down, so that wasn't as much of a concern. But what was that transition like?
So it was nice running D&D because I didn't have to learn a new set of rules. I already knew them really well from having played on Chaos Agents for the better part of a year at that point. I mean, the thing about doing it on stream, right, is that we all have our seats that we sit at around the table. And just like the physical transition of going from sitting in one of the lower seats to sitting up in the tall GM seat, and being able to see everything from up there, it really messed with my mind for a few moments, because I was sitting here going, I feel like a child with kicking my feet in this really too tall chair because I can't touch the floor. I don't belong here. Panic, panic, panic.
But you were taller than everyone else, status.
and being able to see the whole board and everything. But the transition was really interesting, partially because, on stream, I was the one who let it out with, hi, hello, guys, gals, and non-binary pals. That was my intro. And so I had to be the one talking. And I remember just shaking as I was going through the announcements at just light speed, because I was like, get it over with. Don't let me be the only one talking.
That is, I mean, yeah, we've talked about it before. I've talked about it before on the show, but that is one of the unique aspects of kind of running a game on stream, is that you're a GM and you're also a game show host. Right. And you have these two kind of balances that you sort of have to like follow along, and it's timing, it's knowing when we're going to break, it's knowing that sort of thing, and that's an extra layer that most GMs I don't think really have to consider.
And I mean, it was helpful that I had been on the show for as long as I had at that point. So I had a sense for what the timing was supposed to be. I had the rhythm in my bones at that point. So I just had to do it from my side of from the GM side of things, instead of being the player who occasionally obnoxiously interrupts with things.
So the first part of that two-shot, you're running the Stranger Things, and for those who don't know, this is kind of it's a meta scenario, because the players are kind of playing characters that are playing characters.
Right.
Now, is that construct in the actual scenario itself, or did you kind of pump that up?
We kind of decided to run with the idea, because it's written as if it's written from what's the kid's name? Will, who runs the D&D game. It's written as if he was the one writing it and someone else found it and brought it to their gaming group. And we decided to really run with that and really play with that, and really like do the idea of being a bunch of 12 to 14-year-olds sitting around a table playing D&D, and all of the banter that comes with that. It helped us because we weren't the Chaos Agents, we weren't Natural One, we didn't have that natural banter with an established group. So we were able to be like, okay, we are playing characters who are, as you said, playing characters. Was
there any Mountain Dew on the table?
No, unfortunately.
Missed out. So from that first session, was there a moment where you were like, oh God, I don't know this rule? Or, was there a moment that kind of you had to like deal with a little bit of a struggle?
The biggest panic moment I remember vividly was realizing that everyone in the party had dark vision. So I was operating under the thought and under the assumption that they couldn't see what was in the next room because they were underground and it was dark. And it was meant to be like an ambush scenario. But they could, because they all had dark vision to 60 feet. And I had forgotten completely that everyone had that. And I was like, oh my God. Okay, give me a minute while I put everything out here. And I mean, I think it was Bo who called me on it. Was like, no, we can see into that room. And I was like, my resident rules lawyer. Yeah, I get you.
There's always got to be one at the table.
And to be fair, it's usually me. So
I rarely know the rules of any game I'm playing or running. But like, how did that moment? Did that moment define the session?
For me, it did, but that's because I am an anxious ball of nerves. And so for me, it's like, I remember all of the mistakes that I made and don't really think about, hey, I told a pretty good story. I don't even really know the Stranger Things universe because I haven't watched most of it, but I could describe the Upside Down and I could, tell the story. And made a joke on Thomas naming every NPC Dave by having someone named Evod.
There we go. Nice.
Which amused me greatly. But it to a certain extent, it defined the session for me. But it also set one of my personal DM rules, which is always know what the players can do.
That I mean, yeah, I think that's a good one. Always be aware of the capabilities they have and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And where, as you were running that scenario, were you following it by the book? Were you adding? Were you layering? What was?
So it being my first time out, I didn't really want to mess with it too much. I didn't want to do what James does and does very well, which is, layer everyone in on top of it. It was, here are the sheets that are directly from the book and from the box set. And here is the scenario. I'm not going to mess with it much. Most of what I did was just name the NPCs, which I stole names from the early Stephen King works because that would have been published. Those would have been published around then.
Oh, nice. That's clever. And again, when you're just the first time you run a game, just do that. Just take what's in the box and run it. and run it a few times, because every time you run, it'll get a little more comfortable and a little better. And the second or third time, you're not thinking about the rules. You're thinking about, okay, that character wants this, and you're moving through there. And even how do I say this non-pejoratively? Even with a game that kind of focuses on tactical combat like D&D,
right,
you can start to aim for the story and the relationships that are honestly the reason that, no, that's pejorative, that are the reason that I play the game.
Sure.
That I want to play the game.
Well, and that was something that I thought was very fun about the meta story that we brought into it, because it was, Kelly and I were sisters, and I had been brought in to play this game, and Bo was flirting heavily with Kelly because, I mean, she's his fiance, and that's cool. And then she was fawning all over Grant because Grant was the cool older kid, and it was this fun like relationship within it. It was silly, but it was a lot of fun.
And and that can bring, you can bring some layers to, what is a by design a fairly two-dimensional experience, and that's,
right.
So you've run games on stream, and now you've run games off stream.
Yes.
Which do you prefer?
Honestly, I prefer off stream. I enjoy running games on stream because being able to interact with the audience and with the players gives it more facets to pull from. But I really like running off stream because I can screw up and there's fewer stakes. And especially as a newer GM, I need the room to be able to make mistakes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to push back on that slightly, in that you can always screw up. Like, that is run. I don't run. I don't run games on stream very much different than I run home games. Other than the game show host aspect of it, which is weird.
Right.
And a lot of plot armor.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
but I mean, and admittedly, my style is very much rules. Don't let the rules get in the way of the story.
Sure.
And that, some people have it, and some people, it takes a while for them to think about what their style is. Have you started to feel like a pull in terms of a GMing style?
So I'm very lucky in my TTRPG experience. I am surrounded by phenomenal GMs. Of course, I get to play with you, and I love getting to do that. Thomas has his style, Bo has his, and then off stream, Spike and Adam for two of the games that I play with them, and then Todd in Australia plays just completely different. So I'm surrounded by a bunch of people who have spent a lot of time developing their styles, and I can pick and choose a little bit. Where it's like, okay, I'm not very good at voices. Shockingly, I'm a voice actor.
That is interesting. Yeah,
I'm a voice actor, but I have a hard time with voices when I don't have a script.
You just don't want to bring work home with you.
That's a big part of it. But I mean, like, for example, with the Down Darker Trails game, it's a lot easier to stay in Susanna's voice because it's just the one voice. But if I have to switch between a bunch of different ones, there's a moment of where I have to pause and click it over. And I don't know. I think I spent too much time in the theater and film world. I don't like dead air.
Silence is a powerful tool.
It definitely can be. And it's something that I use carefully in the redacted reports when I'm editing that, where it's like, I'm putting in these pauses. How long does this pause need to be after this revelation? Where it's just like, just sit with that for a second.
Yeah, that's that's an interesting aspect. So for those that don't know, Tiana is the sound engineer slash, I don't know, co-creator. I don't want to cause any problems.
Editor, producer, player. I wear a lot of hats on the redacted reports.
Yeah, and of a live play Delta Green podcast, the redacted reports, which is fantastic. And in a way, that sound editing that you're doing is GMing,
to a certain extent, yeah.
You are directing beats of the story, and that's an interesting layer to it of looking at GMing from a very mechanical aspect.
Yeah, and well, and I'm self-conscious a lot, especially listening to my own recordings, because I have a speech impediment that makes it difficult for me to think in character intelligently quickly. And for GMing, boy, so many balls to keep up in the air. And that's another. I agree with you that you can always screw up on streams, and I frequently do as player or GM. But having the ability to go out and edit out the times that I say I is really nice.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, for me, it's about, I feel safe at this table, and I can be vulnerable.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's also very easy for me to say as almost entirely a person of every kind of privilege, and it's one of the reasons that I feel so strongly about making everybody feel comfortable at the table, at least at the start. Once you're playing the game, if we're playing Call of Cthulhu, I want to make you as uncomfortable as possible once we're playing, but I want everybody to feel like they have a moment at the table that is theirs. And and that what you just said there about that is part of it, that we all have those things that make us cringe, that whether it's a speech impediment, or whether it's I'm really good at thinking of something that I should have said 5 minutes ago. Oh man, it would have been so much funnier if I'd done. And and we all have something like that.
Right.
And when you're at a good table is when that's okay.
Yeah. And being a newer GM, I feel a lot of pressure to make the table safe for other people, because I had not encountered TTRPG safety tools until I played with you with Call of Cthulhu. I had never encountered that because it never really came up in any of the 2 D&D games that I had played up to that point. So that was the first time that I'd heard of the X card. And now, it's much more standard in games that I play in. And as a newer GM, I feel a lot of pressure to make the space safe for other people, which is super important. But then I have a harder time feeling vulnerable myself, because it's like, if I'm super open, does it make other people uncomfortable? Which I think the answer is no. But there's a part of my brain that is like, I'm making the space safe, so I need to be more guarded. It's a weird balancing act for me. And I think that will diminish as I get more confident as a GM, excuse me.
Thank you. That's a very important distinction. We don't use that term here.
It's dirty. Sorry.
I think that's true. And I think that, it is another layer of, especially if you're going sort of deeper into the safety tools, when you're starting to deal with veils and triggers and things like that, where you have to remember, okay, so and so doesn't like spiders, this person doesn't like things with teeth, and that's when you just always make sure that folks know that the X card is there, and also fade to black is there. Fade to black is super important, because you don't know where the story. Well, all right, let me rephrase that. I don't know where the story is going to go, and if it goes somewhere that people don't like, I want them to be able to have the chance to say, "Whoa, I don't want to see any more of that."
Yeah,
that's a super, and it's a different conversation, but I think still an important conversation when it's people because there's actually some pernicious dangers to playing with your friends when it can become when it can be, how do I want to say this? When it's easier to slip into maybe some unfortunate habits.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
And, there are things that you're like, well, this is okay because, it's just us friends. And you're doing that. And, Jim, who's playing with you inside, is like, well, that sucked. And so you have to even when you're playing with friends at a small home game, doing check-ins and I'll give you an example. I play a home Call of Cthulhu game, and my brother, who I was playing with, I was like, yeah, what was it? I was saying like, I always want to take whatever the players say and do that. And he goes, well, last week you didn't do that. And here's where. And I was like, you're 100% right. And we're going to retcon that, because he had come up with a great thing. And I had been so set in a way that I blocked it. And it didn't even occur to me because I really liked the thing that I had. And so, be okay with retconning things. If your players are, if your players say, hey, I didn't like the way that went down, just say, okay, here's where we're walking it back real quick. And here's what that means. You can restructure things pretty easily to make those connections and let your players feel like they are part of the story, which is super important.
Yeah, and I mean, a good example of that I've encountered with you was in dealing with the Nidacris situation in Masks of Nyarlathotep, where I was super uncomfortable with how that went with Alexandria, mostly because it felt wrong in a lot of ways, because it's like, this is a white English woman in the body of a Egyptian queen. That is,
yeah.
But we talked about it and figured it out and found a great way to have it. I mean, it wasn't any easier on Alexandria. In fact, in many ways, it was harder. But I felt better about it because it got addressed. And having that kind of an example for me as a new GM is really helpful, because it's like, okay, people who've been doing this for decades can say, yeah, that wasn't cool. I didn't handle that well. How do we redo this? And I think that allows me to be like, okay, even people who've been doing this a long time get it wrong. That makes it safer for me.
Yeah, you're always, there are always going to be things like that come up, and the trick is how you address them. And as a GM, the trick is how you address them and how you just laser focus on making your players comfortable. And, if your player comes to you outside of the game and says, hey, this happened and it made me uncomfortable, that needs to be fixed, and there are a bunch of different ways to fix that. And if, again, you're at a table that is kind and that is willing to, is willing to sort of go on a journey with you, that can be fixed narratively. But, in cons, that can be harder when you've got people you don't know and that sort of thing. And so, how you run a con game is totally different than how you... So your second game that you ever ran, also on stream, right?
Yeah, the Saltmarsh campaign.
Yeah, and that was supposed to be a one-shot?
No, it was meant to be 3-shot. It was supposed to be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of that week to cover for Thomas and Bo being at God, what con was that? It was which one?
Gamma.
Okay, they were at Gamma because, I mean, of course, with Bo and Thomas gone, we couldn't do Natural One or Chaos Agents, so I covered the 3 days, and that was all it was supposed to be. And dang it, Ezra, I wrapped it up. I did it within the time frame that I was allotted, and I was ready to be done. And then Bo got sick, and then we went into lockdown the next day. And that was how a 3-shot became a 9-shot. That wasn't my fault.
And how it kept going. But so, when you think about what was the difference in, like, how do you feel that what did you learn from the first game that you ran that you sort of brought to the second?
In the first game, I was very much flying by the seat of my pants and working with what was in the box. So the pre-made character sheets, all of that sort of thing. In the second game, everyone made their own characters. I was still working with the module that was in the Saltmarsh book. I felt like I had more control, though, because I felt like I was like, okay, I've gotten the really rough first one out of the way. Cool. To borrow a phrase from Adventure Time, sucking at something is the best way to become kind of good at something. And I was like, okay, that first one sucked. Didn't like it. We all had a good time, and we can laugh about it later. This one I felt a lot more in control because I had... It's weird. I like building terrain. So I built the haunted house.
There was a lot of terrain in that game.
There was, and I had so much fun building every layer of it and being like, okay, here's where I think things are going to happen. I was able to be more flexible because I could be like, okay, they didn't catch the clue that was in this room, but this room is facing in the same direction, so it makes sense for it to be over here instead. And just like casually dangling a hint, hey, there seems to be something over on the windowsill there. So I was playing, I had Amy in my second game. God help me.
That adds a chaos factor for sure.
It does, but one of the things that I had learned from playing with Amy and from running Stranger Things was that at least for me, for newer groups, I kind of have to appoint a leader, especially in like the short shots. So I was like, okay, Amy, you're the one who is in charge of this group. And it actually grounded her a lot. It was great because she couldn't go off and be the chaos monger.
Well, that's a very GM decision. Thinking strategically like that, and sort of knowing your players' strengths and weaknesses, and how you can both exploit them, but also manage them to sort of give everybody a better experience at the table. That's a big part of GMing.
Yeah, and that was something that was kind of important to me because, I mean, I love playing with Amy, don't get me wrong, but also she's the kind of person that needs to be focused, I think, a little bit. And I enjoy playing off of her chaos in Cthulhu. It's great fun. But also, I had, who else did I have? I had Warren, and Warren really likes trolling. So I had to think about that. He was playing a completely new class. I did not know anything about Artificer at that point. So I was like, okay, you're going to have to explain this to me. But I borrowed things from other GMs that I had played with or had seen played. For example, keeping track of initiative, which it's a thing in D&D. It's tricky to keep track of sometimes. But I had little cards that I kept on top of the DM screen with their hit points, their passive perception, and their AC on the back. And then I would arrange it whenever there was a fight going on. So I could keep things organized up there without having to constantly look down to be like, okay, who's next in initiative?
See, I don't run a lot of D&D anymore. I've evolved, but I put the onus on the players. Like, sure. I want combat to go quickly, so I just start calling down initiatives. 25, 24, 23, and be ready to go, or you're delaying.
And that was something that I liked about the little paper tents, because they could look at it and say, okay, Aubrey is the one who is going right now. I am 2 people down. I need to start thinking about how things are going to happen in those 2 turns that might change what I do on my turn. Because, I mean, of course, the whole battlefield can change in a single person's turn. Right,
yeah. And so, you talked a little bit about how the difference, you felt more in control, and you were clearly thinking about the players at the table and kind of doing some table management. What did you do anything, or were there things in that game that maybe you overextended? Were you out over your skis at any point?
I introduced something into Saltmarsh to try and kind of mess with them, because I wanted the haunted house scenario to actually take the 3 days. I didn't want to go into another section of the module, because at the time we were just doing the 3 days.
Right.
So I was like, okay, how do I extend this bit without going into another module, basically? So I introduced the concept of a haunted doll that was following them. And I neglected to think about the fact that when presented with something like that, players will chase that down to the exclusion of everything else.
It's true.
Because, and looking back on it, it makes perfect sense. Because, of course, if something small and creepy is giggling and following you in the woods, you don't want that thing following you longer than you have to.
Yeah. Chucky must die.
Basically, yeah. So I overextended a bit on that just because I didn't think about it was weird because I didn't think about how I as a player would have reacted to that. And I would have reacted exactly the same as they did. And I didn't take that into consideration, which I was like, this is a cool story element. This doll is going to follow them around and periodically giggle from the back corner, and maybe eventually they'll exercise it, or it'll be an Annabelle and try to kill them, or what have you. And instead, they were like, focus.
Right. This is the story now. Finding this doll.
The Haunted Mansion. Who cares about that? There's a doll that's following us.
How was it? How was it dealing with terrain and tactical combat?
I mean, for me, I'm a very visual person, so having the terrain really helps me plan things out, and really helps set the, one player wants to go running off ahead of everyone else, and then I can keep track of where that player is while people are doing investigations in the one room, and be like, okay, hold that thought for a second. Let me deal with what they're in with what they're doing in the room, and then I don't lose it because there's a visual marker for me to be like, okay, I need to come back to this because this is what that player sees out in the hall. So I like terrain a lot.
Yeah. And did the tactical combat present any challenges for you as a GM?
One of the things that I really want to do, and this is, again, D&D, because I have yet to evolve. I am still in my starter form. But a book that I really want to get is The Monsters Know What They're Doing. I have heard nothing but high praise for it, thinking about, how do these monsters and how do these, characters really, how do they handle what the player characters are doing and how do they work tactically? I admit readily I am not a hugely tactical person when it comes to war games like D&D is. I know when I'm playing a character, I know what I can do and I know what the others around me can do, but I'm like, okay, one change over there and plans are gone. Just figure out what to do.
Yeah, and that's such a part of D&D where there's literal, this encounter needs to take 10% of their resources, and there's a balance to it that to building scenarios, and so now that you've run some homebrew games, like what is your approach to building scenarios in terms of do you have to measure things to the party's strength, or do you I find that I always underestimate, if I'm creating D&D things, I always underestimate the party strength.
Yeah, that's a pretty common thing. One of the things that has become important to me as a player and also as a GM is I don't like fights for the sake of fights. In my opinion, a fight should always further something, whether it furthers the story or it furthers a character development or something. They went and stuck their nose in the wrong corner of Faerun and now hags are after them. But it has to be, for me at least, it needs to be something that has weight and consequence, because if you're going to spend 2 hours doing something, it needs to actually have a reason behind it. And that is something that I don't particularly like about stream games, because one of the things that we have to think about from a streaming perspective is what brings people in. And it's always the shiny, pretty maps.
Wandering damage.
The shiny, pretty maps that come out during combat, which is great because we have amazing terrain at Quest and Chaos that I love playing with, but it really kind of forces us to fight more than I as a player or as a GM really like. Like, one of my favorite moments in the Saltmarsh campaign was actually I spent the enormous amount of time putting together a Roll20 map, and they bypassed everything by having the lizard person go first and talk to the lizard people and be like, we come in peace, we want to help. And I was like, long string of expletives. But it made sense. And I wasn't going to force them into a fight because it didn't make sense from a character perspective.
Yeah, that is a big part of running any game, is just being able to pivot when they, because the players are going to do something you don't expect. And that's the awesome moment. And so, I probably have gone too far in the other direction where I don't even really plan stuff. And I just kind of, you were running the boxed, you were running out of the box stuff just to get reps in.
Yeah.
I run out of the box stuff because that's what I riff off of. Like, I take, I take something that's been written and then I just let the players make an utter mess of it, and that's when I start improvising. When it allows me to have that beginning, middle, and end, and then just make everything fuzzy in between. And I really, I think there's a lot to be said for people who can come up with a whole world and a story and all that stuff on their own. Fantastic. But, you can take printed materials and you can put your fingerprints all over them, and you can mold them to your style.
And that's something that I admire James a lot for being able to do. Like, I went and looked at Dragon of Icespire Peak once we finished one of the scenarios, and I was like, that is unrecognizable compared to what we did. And, there were a couple of new GM mistakes that happened in there, but new GMs make mistakes. That's
the name of the show is Keep the Game Moving. That is your main job as a GM, is you just keep the game moving. You're always going forward. And that's, I actually think that's super important. That's because when it happens that people are like, wait, what happened? But 2 episodes ago, this happened. You're like, well, here's where we are now. Let's go,
just onward.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So when you run home games, are you doing homebrew stuff, or are you using materials, sort of?
So I have run part of one homebrew campaign because I wanted to do something with my international group. We have someone in Belgium, someone in Australia, two other people in California, and someone in the Midwest. So we're kind of all over the place. It's usually about 4 or 5 in the morning for our Australian friend.
Modern role playing.
It's pretty fun. And for that, I was really inspired by Beau's World of Razmore, and I wanted to explore some of the after effects of what happened with Ted in the Theodore Rising one-shot that you and I were in. I wanted to explore what happened to that society after this major event happened. So I talked a lot to Beau about what his world entailed. He was, of course, flattered because it was like, oh my God, someone wants to play in my sandbox. Which I
want to do an episode with Beau and his brother and talk about, because they write together, which I think is fascinating.
Yeah.
Like, Beau has a co-writer, and he writes. He's got binders about this world.
He does.
And it's really, I think that's a fascinating process.
It is. And I've heard a lot about it because, I'm not in the game, but Beau and I are good friends. And so he needs someone who isn't his fiance who's in the game to talk to and be like, oh my God, all of these things. This is this, and this. And I'm like, I'm not in the game. You can talk to me all you like. I won't say anything. But with how rich that world was, I wanted to get in there and play in it. And I had a lot of difficulty. I like intrigue. I am bad at creating intrigue. I am better at playing in it. And you know how good I am at that. I'm better at playing it than I am at creating it. And so that game is currently on hiatus until I can figure out what we're doing with it. We're playing Descent into Avernus and a homebrew after that.
When you say intrigue, do you mean like kind of player conflict for whatever value that might be, or do you mean like scheming in the world, sort of social combat versus...
Yeah, I mean more of the social combat, because the characters were all slaves of a particular drow household, and so combat isn't really much of a thing because they're slaves, they don't get weapons. So some of their really cool abilities, and I made sure to tell them this, some of your really cool abilities won't come into play except in the very infrequent times that you do combat. And they had to think about that. And I wanted to run a combat light game because A, combat's hard to balance, and B, combat's not my favorite part of D&D.
In D&D, it takes so much time.
It takes forever. Yeah. And then you just sort of, at the end of it, you're just sort of whacking at things. I prefer the social things. I prefer the interactions. Like, there's a game that I'm going to be playing tonight, and the reason why I love it so much and look forward to it every 2 weeks is because the interactions between the characters and the way that we're discovering the world is way more intriguing than, the fact that there's a white chasing us.
Yeah, I think, and I might gently suggest that there are other systems that could do what you want to do better than D&D does.
That's fair. I am somewhat limited in that I've played in a lot of systems, but I haven't really gotten to know a lot of systems besides Call of Cthulhu, Delta Green, and D&D 5th edition. So those are the ones that I really know, and Delta Green and Call of Cthulhu do not work for what I had in mind.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So what do you think are what have you found are the differences for you in running home games versus stream games?
For me, with stream games, I tend to run modules and things straight out of the book. With home games, I want to explore a story more and explore with the characters more. So I'm spending more time talking to them about, what is your backstory? And it's something I want to do more with stream games too, and follow a little bit more in James's footsteps on that one, where yeah, events happen from the module, but your former lover from 20 years ago is the researcher on it, and you got to deal with that because that did not end well. Type of thing.
I mean, like I said, that is to me the fun of running. I mean, there's also I want to run. I think that too often, I want to be careful how I say this. Too often, home games become a let me download the Wikipedia of my world to you.
Yeah.
And so playing in a licensed property kind of tends to shorthand that. Or, I run Cthulhu because you're playing in the real world. And so, there's an automatic frame of reference there that, I'm finding I'm starting a Warhammer game and I was like, oh crap, I have to explain the gods to everybody. And now I have to talk about this and that.
Right.
And it becomes a sort of a didactic kind of downloading process that it just, it's not why I want to play the game.
Sure.
So yeah, I think that is an interesting difference. Have you, as a player, do you prefer playing or GMing?
I prefer playing. I think I'm a better player than GM, but I want to get better at GMing. So, ask me again in 2 years when I've done more GMing and have a better frame of reference, because I can count on the fingers of one hand how many things I've run.
I have a feeling that most GMs would rather play.
Sure.
I mean, I ask everybody that comes on the show how they became the GM, and it's almost always I was just always the GM, and I'm the opposite. I would far rather run than play.
Sure.
But I think most people would rather play. So you've asked me, you've talked to other GMs. What are the best tips that you've gotten for starting out GMing?
Probably one of the very best tips that I got was, what I've set as my personal GM rule: know what everyone can do and know what everyone wants, because everyone is on the same mission and the same goal, but they have different reasons for wanting to get there. And giving them their moments, their dramatic things. I listened to my friends, Andrew Gertson and Adam Power do a podcast called Inspiration Point, where they talk about running games because they're both GMs. And one of the things that they emphasized that I really liked was make sure that everyone has that cinematic moment that is there, something that is emotionally powerful, or a moment where they get to be the hero, the big damn hero of their own story, whatever that is, whatever that looks like to them. For some person, for some people, that's, getting revenge on the people who killed their family. For some people, it's finding the thing that they've been searching for, know what it is that they want and why are they doing things.
And don't, I'll go a step further. Know what they want by asking them.
Yes.
Ask the player explicitly, what do you want out of this game? I've done it what skills do you especially want to highlight? Those will definitely show up. I've also done it. One of the things I love in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, every player has an ambition. And whenever you do things that are connected to that ambition, you get a bonus. And in addition, the party has an ambition. And when you achieve that ambition, you have another one. And so there's this constant like moving forward of things.
Sure. I like that.
And it, the ambition idea does just that. It explicitly says, here's what I want. Whether it's, I want to be rich, I want to find my father, I want, it gives you that bullet point of, okay, that's going to happen.
Yeah.
Who knows how, but it's going to happen.
And that also helps with things because I brought a friend of mine into my D&D game who she had never played D&D before, and so I'm like her Sherpa. I help guide her along the way, and I'm like, watch out for that pitfall over there. Don't fall, please. But one of the things that she and I talk about is what to do with downtime as a character. And, it's like we have this week where we're waiting for something to happen. What do you do at that time? And it's like, well, falling into that ambition. For example, in the game that I'm playing tonight with Spike, my character's main ambition is find out what happened to her parents. And so she spends her downtime carousing, getting to know people, buying drinks, making connections, and then being like, how does this tie into this, and this? And find out what happened to my parents, 15 years ago. And that gives her a goal then for her downtime. And having that to draw on, because otherwise, especially in D&D, but also in Call of Cthulhu, it happened in Masks of Nyarlathotep, where it was just go, 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 and there was never any downtime. And it can fall into that trap.
Yeah, I think that's part of that is games with a clock.
Sure.
It automatically makes people go like, oh God, what is it? But I also think, and this is a developing thought on my part, but I think there's also something to stream games in that.
To a certain extent, yeah, because you want to feel like something happened in this game, and people will speak, disparagingly, and I think people will speak disparagingly of shopping episodes, and I don't like that, because sometimes, the shopping episodes, the downtime, picking out ferns for the frickin' tavern, it really helps display who this person is.
Yeah, I would argue that the non-combat, I'm going to call them episodes, but, instances or whatever, tell you a lot more about the character than the combat ones do.
Yeah, because combat is very do or die. There's a black and a white. There is, you do the thing or you die.
Combat is a board game, and one of the reasons that I almost exclusively do theater of the mind, is because things change when you're looking at that. You're going, okay, how many steps? 7, that sort of thing. It becomes less about the grand sweeping epic visuals and more about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and necessarily it becomes that kind of tactical board game that is not what I enjoy in a role-playing game.
Right. And I'm coming a lot more to that. I like the visual aspect with something that is as technically heavy as D&D, because you have to know, how big is the sphere for Storm Sphere, and who all is going to get caught in it, because I don't want to accidentally drop, say, for example, Shatter on one of my teammates.
I'm going to push back on that, because you don't have to. That can all be handled just as easily through theater of the mind, through, just asking your players things. Yeah. And then, like having them, did you cast it in the right place? Make a wisdom roll.
That's fair.
Because, it's in some ways it's easier to do it that way. But, the theater of the mind way really frees it up to be about what the characters are doing and who the characters are, not what is the player counting, and what does this 5-foot step ability let me, that sort of thing.
And there are a couple podcasts that I listen to that are by necessity theater of the mind, because they're podcast D&D games. And I will agree with you on that, because of how well the players and the GMs describe things that are going on in those games. So it's something that I need to think more about. I think this is, as you say, a developing thought.
Well, and, with something like the redacted reports, that is, only an audio experience.
Mm-hmm.
You know, description and, you know, describing how you do things is a way of creating character beats.
Yeah.
And bringing that same sense to every game, where description of things, and, you know, even if it's something as simple as when you're the GM and the character has done the last damage, how do you kill it? You know, what does the killing blow look like? Give them that moment to, like, either, you know, if they're the barbarian, they slash the head off and they scream, or, you know, if they're the thief, they sneak around the back and, you know, whatever it is. But just, it's another way of, A, it lets the character put their imprint on things that are happening, and B, it lets you reinforce that, you know, hey,
Mm-hmm.
you're the sneaky guy, you know, that sort of thing. It creates that. Tell me about a time you wanted to say no to a player. Because I think this is one of the most interesting challenges a GM faces.
So when I was running Saltmarsh, I am not hugely familiar with the Ranger class. It's not a class that I particularly like, and I happen to think that Beastmaster is the worst of them. And Aubrey was playing a Beastmaster, which is, you know, it was her choice, and she, you know, she had her reasons for it. We had long discussions about what her animal companion was going to be, because she wanted something that was cool, and, you know, every player wants something that is cool, that stands out. And we settled on what she ended up having, but there were some times where I didn't just want to say no. I had to say no a couple of times, because I was like, this will break things, because it's not the right CR, or, you know, all the technical nonsense stuff that goes into the D&D.
But you could have, she had a mini version of it, you know, give her the cool thing, make it small, or, you know, I think one interesting, so I don't tell the players when I'm going to do this, but every once in a while when I'm running something, I'll just decide I'm going to say yes to everything. And so when the players, you know, hey, is there a fire escape there? There sure is, you know, and you just, because they'll get you where you're going.
Yeah.
And, you know, there are times when it's probably a good idea to say no to players, but I don't think there are a lot of them. I really think, I personally believe, by and large, that saying no and sort of, when a player says, hey, can I do this cool thing? And you say no, you're deflating that player. You're minimizing that player. And it's super, that's, to me, that's the hardest part of GMing. So it's actually, I always think that is a fascinating decision with players. I talked in a previous episode with another Call of Cthulhu GM, and, you know, he made the point that for his style, he doesn't want to say yes. He doesn't want the players to feel that level of comfort. He wants them to feel like that, because he mainly runs one-shots, which I think also factors into that. But, you know, he wants them to feel that frustration and that, like, oh my God, I'm a normal person and this all hell's breaking, you know, that sort of thing. Or as he puts it, he wants to say yes in a way that reiterates the ominous doom, you know, so that, you know, you get exactly what you want and you feel terrible about it.
Yeah, that's fair. And that's something that I have been learning more as a newer GM. I was talking at length to the new handler for the Redacted Reports, Dan. And one of the things that he said that really struck me was he does not like saying no to players. He will either say yes or say roll for it. And that struck me as being a really interesting philosophy. And I was just like, I need to think more about that, because the whole thing about improv, right, is yes and. How do I take what you're giving me and make it better? How do I make it scarier? How do I make it more epic? How do I make it more?
And, you know, at the end of the day, we want players to feel like they were the solution. You know, maybe that solution as is often the case in my games, causes much larger problems. But, they were the solution. And when they're coming up with ideas, it's supernatural, and I do it. You're like, okay, they want to do that. Here's all the ways that could go. No, here's where no, and just be like, yeah, sure, throw that dynamite.
Let's see what happens.
And it's a more satisfying and a more collaborative experience around the table. And it's not, it sounds accommodating maybe, or it sounds like, well, you're getting rid of the challenge of whatever, that they won't feel like it. But really, 9 times out of 10, when players are asking you a question, it's not a how do I win? It's a definition question. Usually it's something like, is there a candelabra, or is there a chandelier, or can I find a weapon around there?
Mm-hmm.
And those are the sorts of questions that, in my opinion, I will always say yes to.
Yeah.
Or at the very least, I'll say, roll for it, make a luck roll.
And it's very empowering to be like, okay, I think I have an idea for how I can make this work, but I need to know what's around me and how, can I jump up and grab the bottom of the fire escape and swing off of it?
Yeah. I mean, it's and like I said, it's one of, to me, the most challenging parts of GMing, because even, I'm Mr. Story Game. I'm Mr. Let's all sit at the table and tell a great story, but I'm still like, I'm going to mess you up, and that mindset is there. It's always there. There is a weird dichotomy of players want the GM to be awesome. GM wants the player to be awesome, but also there's a conflict,
Sure.
And so that dichotomy is and finding the ways to make that dichotomy interesting and fun for everybody is, I think, one of the big challenges of GMing.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And it's something that I am learning to develop more as my style develops, because I mean, as you said, all of the reps, gotta get stronger.
I think that's a big part of it. So what's a system you would love to run that you haven't run?
I would really love to run a Delta Green game. I really enjoy Call of Cthulhu, but I don't think I'd want to run something in that necessarily, just because I don't know the history well enough. Delta Green is now, or within the last 50 years or so, and I really love for me, the difference between Delta Green and Call of Cthulhu is that you really should feel more empowered in Delta Green, but somehow. So in Delta Green, at least for me, it is a group of professionals who have signed up for this, really. They know what they're dealing with. They know what they're going into, and they go in and they're like, okay, there's an issue. We're going to go deal with this. And you would think that knowing what you're going into would help, but somehow having those skills and abilities and not being able to say, this isn't my problem, because it is, and not being able to say, this isn't real, because it is. You don't get that layer to protect your sanity.
Right.
So it really messes with you more. And I want to play with that, because I think that's interesting, and play with the weird stuff that goes on in our world, and the possibilities for Lovecraftian horrors to have adapted to the internet age.
Are you familiar with The Laundry at all?
No.
The Laundry is a fantastic. It's a role-playing game. It's also, I think, a set of books, but it's essentially about British Delta Green. But the entire thing is this mystifying and impenetrable bureaucracy that is the Laundry, and it's this organization that is, just ridiculously bureaucratic. Like, you have to fill out forms for everything, and it takes the supernatural and makes it tediously mundane, which I love.
I love that. That's ridiculous.
There you go. My Redacted Reports character is going to be a laundry agent who's just like, why are you all people? Shouldn't we be filling out forms? Is this?
No, buddy. You're in America. We do things a little bit differently here. We're the cowboys, friend.
All right. So we close every episode with the Space Jam question. aliens are invading the Earth and they will kill us all unless you run an awesome 4-hour game. What are you running?
I would run the Delta Green scenario, Last Things Last. It is an excellent blend of investigation and storytelling and getting a group together and a little bit of combat and some really hard decision making where it's like you can end it with killing the thing in the septic tank, or you can end it with it getting away. There's a lot of ways that it can go, and there's a lot of ways for things to go very wrong. So I think that it would be engaging enough to show off what game systems can be while being kept in a 4-hour scenario.
Nice. I think that's great. Well, so I haven't put this up yet because I was having too much fun talking, but you can find Tiana on Twitter at Vanna1895. Is that a Vanna White reference? I don't know. That's
no. Back when I first got into Lord of the Rings, I found a website called Barrow Downs where I got my elvish name, which is Vanna Loswin. It translates to fair-haired snow maiden, which is perfect for a blonde kid from Alaska.
There you go.
I go by that pretty much everywhere on the internet, and Vanna is just the short version of that.
And you can see Tiana on Quests and Chaos in just about everything they do. And if you haven't, check out the Redacted Reports. They're just about to start season 2. Actually, when this goes to air, they will have started season 2, and it's a very different actual play experience. Well, give us the elevator pitch for the Redacted Report, Tiana.
So the elevator pitch for the Redacted Reports, it is a Delta Green actual play podcast that is edited for clarity and to cut out some of the big tangents that are typical when you're around a table with people that you like, with sound effects and music added in to help create, as Ezra said earlier, the story beats. So I can put in the creepy music or the really spooky music box to be like, there's something more to this kid. Y'all might want to pay attention. I have a lot of fun building the soundscapes and making it more immersive because my training is in theater. And so I want to make it a lived experience for the people who are listening to it.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's almost more an audio play than it is an actual play.
And that is very much my goal because I love radio dramas. I love listening to that sort of thing and feeling like my favorite example is Neverwhere, the 6-episode audio drama that they did. That was phenomenal. And for me, that was really inspiring because they built out the world and they trusted you to hear what was going on and understand it. They weren't saying, I'm going to get my keys now, jingle, jingle.
Right.
You heard a jingle and then you heard a key go into a lock and you knew what was happening. You didn't have to have it explained. And right. I strive for that. And
my gosh, could I use to be edited for clarity? Oof. Well, Tiana, thank you so much for joining us. This was a great conversation. And it's really interesting to talk with someone who's kind of just starting their GMing journey. And, I'm excited to see where it goes.
Thank you so much for having me on. This has been a lot of fun, and you've left me with a lot of things to think about.
Well, you might want to see someone about that. Thank you so much for your likes, your subscribes, your comments. As always, keep the game moving.